Microsoft is the latest example of a high-performing company to explicitly warn all candidates against the use of AI in their job interviews. And they do it right on their jobs webpage under the candidate code of conduct, which is, by the way, 1/3 of that page. Responsible use of AI. We encourage candidates to use AI tools responsibly and ethically during preparation as long as it reflects their true capabilities. During assessments and interviews, candidates should demonstrate their own skills without outside assistance unless explicitly permitted. Why would Microsoft, someone who's very much interested as a business in the adoption of AI, why would they choose to explicitly warn everyone against the use of AI in their job interviews? Well, actually, they're not alone in this trend. I've recently shared videos around how NVIDIA and Google do the same thing simply because they noticed that perfectly qualified candidates shoot themselves in the foot using AI in these job interviews, right? The first thing an interviewer will look for when screening candidates in job interviews today would be for honesty, right? Even before your subject matter expertise, simply because there is an epidemic of candidates using AI in these job interviews and genuinely sounding untruthful, right? How would this happen? How would you use AI unsuccessfully in job interviews, and what are some tips if you want to improve your performance using AI, by the way? The first and the most common example is when a candidate rewards their answers using AI. And whenever I tell candidates to be aware about this trend, say, but Dan, you know what, my answers sound so much better when I reward them using AI. To which my answer would be, try role-playing your answers, try speaking your answers out loud, book a coaching session with me if you want. Because what I found is in 95% of candidates is that the moment you start speaking your answers out loud, you realize it's not you, the one talking. In other words, it's someone else's language, and you remember the honesty trigger, that might raise suspicion about you as a candidate during a job interview. It's a slightly more complicated, and I could go with a longer explanation, but let's keep this basic for now. The second a very common reason why candidates would shoot themselves in the foot using AI in job interviews is the use of invented metrics or invented decisions. And here's how it goes. Whenever you start a conversation, so to speak, a chat using AI on how to improve your interview answers, sooner or later, AI will suggest, even without you asking it, a new metric which has nothing to do with the reality, or a decision which was not yours, right? And simply because they would suggest this and it sounds so good to most people, you would say, hey, you know what, maybe this is something acceptable during job interviews. After all, we're supposed to sell ourselves, right? The best of our capabilities. Now, what I can tell you, what actually happens in these job interviews, remember I said skilled interviewers, the first thing they look in these job interviews is for honesty, right? And what happens is that they will try to challenge those metrics, challenge those decisions. This is what they're trained for. They will try to perform a deep dive test, using follow-up and challenge questions, right? I've recently had candidates who did their elevator speech, you tell me about yourself, and introduced, a little bit of a metric that was not the most relevant for their role. And what happens is they got pushback from their interviewer for the remainder of the interview session. So imagine yourself having to prove that metric for 1 hour straight during a job interview. So this actually does happen. And the third scenario that I want you to consider using AI for your job interviews is when you genuinely try to make your answers better, not necessarily by rewarding them using AI, but by using some suggestions to make them, maybe on the longer side, such as to introduce a few frameworks in there and, show a little bit as a more of a subject matter expert, more of a theoretical subject matter expert than a practical one. And what I found is whenever a candidate enriches their interview answers using AI-provided content, those answers will become unmanageable during a job interview. What do I mean by this? Well, it simply means that during a job interview, so you can, whenever you try to deliver your AI-assisted answer, so to speak, you will have a tendency to read that from your notes. So your delivery will suffer a lot simply because you introduce some elements in there that might not help you with the best possible flow. So long story short, what I'm suggesting you here would be to role play your interview answers, regardless if you use AI or regardless if you only used AI to gather a bit more insight or intel in your interview answers, because the moment you speak them out loud, it will become a lot more evident as how it works. As to newer interview trends, I can tell you there is a growing backlash against using AI in job interviews. Candidates start realizing these things. And if you want to experiment something new, I would invite you to try using pen and paper. If you would like to build your story bank and brainstorm, in the most efficient possible way for your job interview. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.